Hi, Sean. I would have been presenting on manifestation determinations, an interdisciplinary guide to best practices by Molly Knudsen and Carrie Bethune. Um, if I were in class doing this presentation, I would have started by asking how many people were already familiar with manifestation determinations, just to kind of gauge prior knowledge. Since this is such a specific legal and educational process, I'd expect that most people have heard of it, um, but maybe not feel as confident about like explaining it, even though we did go over it briefly in class. This article, it focuses on discipline and students with disabilities, specifically how they're often overrepresented in suspensions. It introduces legal protections under IDEA and centers on manifestation determinations review. If I were presenting this live, I would have asked why students with disabilities might be disciplined more often. I think one likely reason that behaviors connected to disabilities is likely, impulsivity or difficulty regulating emotions. You know, it can be misunderstood as intentional misconduct instead of something that needs support, in my opinion. Um, to kind of understand the article, there are a few key terms: MDR, IEP, FBA, BIP, and interdisciplinary team. Sorry, that's a mouthful. Um, if I were in class, I would have had everyone briefly try defining one of these with a partner really quickly. Like for example, IEP is something that most of us are familiar with. It's an individualized plan for a student. Um, and I would have clarified, um, first, I guess. But an FBA and BIP are where it gets more specific, since those focus directly on behavior. And then I would have clarified that an FBA helps figure out why a behavior is happening, and a BIP is a plan created to address it. That's where I was trying to go with that. So why MDR matters. Um, So students with disabilities are suspended more often, unfortunately, and often for nonviolent behaviors. MDRs are required under IDEA and protect students' rights. Um, if I were presenting this live, I would have asked if current discipline systems are always fair, for students with disabilities. And personally, my own answer would be no, not always. Um, because without processes like MDR, schools might treat all behavior the same without like considering some of those causes for, for those behaviors. So what specifically is an MDR? An MDR is a meeting that happens after about 10 days of removal from school. Um, the team will answer two key questions. Um, was the behavior caused by a disability, and was the IEP implemented correctly? Um, I think for the first question, whether behavior is caused by the disability, it's much harder because the behavior is complex and not always tied to one factor. That's just an example of maybe something I'd be looking for if I asked the class. So some MDR outcomes, they're there are two outcomes. If the behavior is not related to the disability, um, normal discipline applies usually. If it is related, the school conducts an FBA, creates or revises a BIP, and the student usually returns to their placement. I would have asked which outcome seems more challenging for schools, and I think the second one is because it requires more time, and some collaboration in actually changing supports, and than just like assigning consequences. So who exactly is on the team? So the MDR team typically includes parents, teachers, administrators, and kind of specialists like, a school uh, psychologist and a behavior specialist. Uh, if I were in class, I would have asked the class, uh, like which one of them kind of has the most influence in this role. And I would probably say that administrators often have a lot of influence because they understand policy and discipline procedures. But ideally, I really I want to nail this on the head. Ideally, it should be a balanced decision where teachers and families have just as equal as a strong input. I just think that's so important, because they are truly the people that are seeing the kiddo every day, you know? It just makes sense. So how teachers use this practice, it's the most important part for us as future teachers, um, that we are active participants and we bring data, observations, insight into the student's behavior. We can also help connect behavior to the classroom environment. Um, if I were a teacher, I would personally bring notes on when the behavior happens, how often, and what triggers it, and what responses seem to help or not as well. Just the more the merrier, as we've learned in this class and all of our other classes that typically are discussed about this subject. Uh, so some step-by-steps for teachers. The steps include documenting behavior, reviewing the IEP, coming prepared, collaborating, and then supporting the plan afterward. If I were asking a question here, I'd ask which step is the most challenging to a lot of um, my classmates. Like, what do they feel is the most challenging? Um, and in my opinion, I'd say a lot of them, possibly all of them. I mean, every single one has its own complexities. So I'm not really looking for a specific answer from the class. Um, so the best practices for teachers is, including all of the voices included, using clear language, staying respectful, and focusing on student success. I would have asked why involving families can be challenging. And, this is another difficult one, as, it is difficult because communication barriers, time constraints, or differences in perspectives um, can be a roadblock. But it is essential because families know the students best outside of school. So asking the right questions is huge. Um, so instead of blaming the student, we typically ask whether they have the skills, understanding, or control needed. Keyword we keyword ask. If this were um brought up in class as I'm presenting, I probably would have asked which question stands out the most. in those categories. Um, and that can be any answer from the class. I'm not looking for one specific one. Uh, Using evidence-based strategies, the article definitely highlights strategies like uh, differential reinforcement and behavior contracts, token systems, and positive behavior supports. Um, I think that the positive behavior supports are the most realistic starting point because they focus on reinforcing what students are doing right after or right. Sorry. It focuses on reinforcing what students are doing rather than just correcting them. So some common challenges that are typically brought up or happen during this process is there's a huge lack of training and especially in like confusing legal language and like the difficulty in determining the cause of the behavior. Um, in the class, I would have brought up um, you know, or asked like what do you think is the most challenging part? And I would have potentially hoped that there's that the legal language can be especially difficult because I mean, just it's teachers don't fully understand it and it may feel less confident or you may feel less confident, participating in MDR meetings because of that. So then it's just all around everyone's not being as productive as what they could be. So some key takeaways. Um, I thought that MDR protects the students, and that collaboration is critical, and that teachers play a major role. Um, and along with that, or the decisions should be evidence-based. Um, m my main takeaway is that this process is less about discipline and more about understanding and supporting students appropriately. For the discussion question, I would have asked, should all student misbehavior be treated differently if they have a disability? Why or why not? Um, and to kind of answer this question, uh, I don't think all behavior should automatically be treated differently, but it should always be considered in context. The goal isn't to ex excuse behavior exactly, but it should be understood, and because of that, we can respond correctly in a way that actually helps the student improve. Some final considerations that I have, you know, I would have emphasized that following IDEA, building strong communication with families, is, that helps, and then being prepared for MDR meetings and focusing on supporting rather than punishing students overall. If this were in person, I would have closed by asking for any final thoughts or questions. Um, and that's all I have. Thank you, Sean, for the opportunity to get this done. I know it's not ideal, and I super appreciate once again you letting me do it this way. Uh, have a good one and have a good summer. Bye.